Joshua, give us the latest about how these protests have been going and the government's reaction to the protests.
Police say thousands more north and southbound were rerouted.
Our concern obviously is public safety. So what we wanted to ensure here today and with any action that they planned was that it was done in a way that was safe.
And then in walked 5 people, young people, with police tape and started blowing whistles. They were wearing T-shirts saying, "Stop the pipeline." And at that point, the hearing came to a complete halt.
And welcome back. This is Radio Free Canada. I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
Thanks for tuning in and getting informed, joining up with Idle No More, because people are making a difference. Activism is winning, and we're part of the support structure in society, a defense mechanism against a monumental BS that they're calling the news.
Exactly.
Well, man, come on. You got to say it the way it is. Right now, we're focusing on Idle No More, one of the most important social activism that has occurred in recent history.
It's as big as Occupy, and it's getting more notice, I believe, as well.
Remember, they're painting INM the same way they painted Occupy as being disorganized. They're not talking about the issues. They're not talking about the source of poverty in Canada, and we're here to talk about just that.
Exactly.
There were protests going on Wednesday, and it was phenomenal to see people out from one end of this country to the other.
And they were disrupting the economy.
The economy. Remember, replace the word economy with the words bank profits in any major newscast. You'll understand how the economy actually works.
So we have an update from Mr. Blakeney from Press TV on the day of action.
All right, let's start out with that. And remember, activism is working. This is Radio Free Canada.
We're now joined by Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent, who is joining us now via Skype from the city of Calgary. Now, Joshua, give us the latest about how these protests have been going and the government's reaction to the protests.
Today is Idle No More's day of action. We're seeing a ubiquitous mobilization of Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians to continue to voice their vehement opposition to the highly controversial Bill C-45, this rather draconian omnibus bill, which seeks to do away with many of the traditional rights that Aboriginal peoples have won, most notably the notion that they should be consented with prior to any decisions being made on their behalf. We're seeing train blockades, road blockades. There's an event going on in Calgary this evening, which I'll be covering on behalf of Press TV. And so we're seeing that despite efforts by the Prime Minister and the media to placate and to kind of sow divisiveness amongst the protesters, that the protest movement is indeed indefatigably soldiering on. So the Harper government has met with some Indigenous leaders very briefly, but there's been no clear sign that he wants to make the tangible efforts to continue Canada's heritage of attempting to negotiate with Indigenous peoples and ask their consent. The Indigenous peoples are not stupid in this country. They're highly educated. They're aware that Canada is a resource superpower. They're aware that big oil and the diamond industry and so on have a lot of clout, and especially with the Harper government, and they want to have their fair share of Canada's wealth. Many are now beginning to compare the Idle No More movement to the civil rights movement in the United States or the anti-apartheid movement, and it's quite revealing that quite astounding that that Canada, that was once loved in the world and once looked up to by many nations, now has a global protest effectively against the Harper regime. That, Idle No More has proliferated throughout the world. So you almost have a situation where the whole world is protesting Canada's government. So the Indigenous protesters and their supporters are being characterized as kind of renegade criminals by the Zionist-influenced media in this country. But they would argue that, in fact, the Harper government's legislation is inconsistent with the supreme law of Canada, and thus they are the ones who are upholding the law when faced with lawless, reprobate politicians.
All right, Joshua, thanks a lot for that. That was Joshua Blakeney, Press TV's correspondent, speaking to us live via Skype from Calgary.
And that guy is so coherent. He says it straight out. Educated and informed Native Indians.
My goodness, he really puts it to the Harper government, though, doesn't he?
Oh, man. He says the word fascism, and it is intellectual and social fascism.
It is.
The definition of fascism is when you put corporations, corporate interests over human interest or human independence.
Yeah, and also he's addressing Canada's perceived stature in the world as well.
We're on the wrong side of history. Stephen Harper is putting us there. It's a 100% Zionist attitude from a federal government that is putting us on the wrong side of history. We're supplying warplanes and millions of dollars of support for Mali, and no action yet for Idle No More.
And we're investing our pension funds in Israel's apartheid government as well.
I know.
And that
our own pension funds.
Yeah.
Okay, let's run this real quick, and then we'll talk about it.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. We begin tonight with the ever-growing Idle No More movement. A national day of action saw First Nations across the country staging a variety of protests demanding that the First Nations voices be heard. On Vancouver Island, it was a day marked by a blockade of the Pat Bay Highway by the Saanich First Nations and their supporters. It went off without a hitch, but as CTV's Stephanie Sherlock reports tonight, that may not be a good thing.
Marching, hundreds strong. They blockade the highway, marking a national day of action.
All of Canada's nation must stand together!
Members of the Sayout and Sartlet First Nations together on the roadway that cuts a path through their reserves.
With Harper doing what he's doing, what they're trying to do to us, it's got to stop.
They are protesting the federal government's Bill C-45, saying it strips them of treaty rights and endangers the environment.
Canada only allows us to exist! It's time to let the children live!
We have to start standing up for our children and grandchildren now in order to guarantee that our lives can continue as was meant to be.
For me, this is about justice and supporting Indigenous people.
Only a handful of vehicles get caught up heading south on the Pat Bay Highway.
My mom told me this morning, but I thought I'd make it, and fortunately I didn't.
I didn't realize this was going to happen. There's no signs.
Police say thousands more north and southbound were rerouted.
Our concern obviously is public safety. So what we wanted to ensure here today and with any action that they planned was that it was done in a way that was safe.
Despite the fact that hundreds showed up for this protest, with a lack of cars due to Central Saanich providing detour options, some are wondering if it will even have the desired effect.
We went around it, so we didn't see it.
I don't know really. I mean, it didn't affect us.
And even if it does have the desired effect, is the message being heard?
I'm not too sure what it's about.
Don't know why they did it. Why? Do you know why?
Still, there is hope that change will come.
I'd like to see it where, for the first time in history, that Aboriginal people would be included in the decision-making.
Stephanie joins us now live with more. Stephanie, not a lot of cars, as it turned out, were actually stopped at the site. So did the message get across, and what happens next?
Well, the message is a national one, of course, so I think the combined efforts of this day of action will be felt on that scale. But locally, regionally, it's really hard to get the feeling and vibe of a protest of this nature without actually being there. And anyone present for the demonstrations in downtown Victoria over the last few weeks can certainly attest to that. And for those that do want to learn more, there's an information session tonight at UVic at the First People's House. Starts at 7, but we've just heard moments ago that people are already lining up. So if you want to get in on that, you need to get over there quick.
All right.
So, I mean, there, once again, you see it blatantly. They say, are you informed of why they're protesting? No, I'm not informed. And then they don't describe why the protests are occurring.
No, and it was very clever how the government rerouted traffic around the protesters in the interest of public safety.
The government and the RCMP actually diverting.
Yes.
So, you're not aware.
So you don't interrupt commerce and the economy.
The economy. Remember, bank profits equal economy, and that's another story that's not talked about. Oh, fractional reserve lending. Wait, Vic Taves got his 17-year-old babysitter pregnant.
But one of the big things about Bill C-45 is the lack of environmental protections.
Yes.
And the fact that it strips away native rights for their own productions as well.
Okay, so you've got the two issues not being covered here. Number one, poverty that's created by legislation in banks or legislation in government. And then you have a tax on the environment. And, no coverage on that.
Oh, no coverage on that. No, that's not why they're protesting. It's all about money management. Yeah, right.
Let's check it out. This is the story.
Okay.
The environment is also the subject of new research out tonight. Canadian scientists say they have strong evidence that pollution levels near the Alberta oil sands have increased significantly since production began. And as Margot McDermott tells us, they fear the effects could be felt right up the food chain, from fish and birds to humans.
After 50 years of this, a new study seems to remove all doubt. Oil sands chemicals are ending up in northern Alberta lakes.
It clearly shows that industry is actually increasing these contaminants. Calcium levels here are very high, though, right?
Yeah.
Queen's University biologist John Small worked on the study with scientists from Environment Canada. They studied core samples of mud from 6 lakes downwind of Fort McMurray. They focused on cancer-causing substances called PAHs, produced when anything is burned. PAHs from burning petroleum have a unique fingerprint and can be tracked. The scientists found PAH levels in those lakes are 2 to 23 times higher than they were in the 1960s.
Our study certainly confirms that, but also shows one lake which is 90 kilometers away and is also showing the effects of the oil sands now. So probably the footprint of the oil sands is even larger than we had previously thought.
Scientist David Schindler has warned for years contaminants are making their way into the food chain. 2 years ago, he found deformed fish downstream of Fort McMurray. He thinks the new study is proof of a big problem.
We've been given this idea that there's some sort of immaculate conception at work in the oil sands that makes it a non-polluting industry. And some of us have known all along that that had to be BS.
But the industry points out the study shows while chemicals are increasing in lakes, they're still not at highly dangerous levels.
I think it points to the fact that the ecology is not being harmed currently.
Once the data growing public concern over the oil sands prompted the federal government to set up a new independent monitoring system last year.
To be sure that we don't get into situations where cumulative levels do get past acceptable levels.
But the study warns those pollution levels could rise quickly if the oil industry goes ahead with plans to triple production in the next 25 years. Margo McDermott, CBC News, Ottawa.
So, of course, they're not talking about the Idle No More protesters standing up for the environment.
Absolutely not. And the fact that, cancer rates are increasing because of the pollution from the oil sands.
Okay, so there's statistical evidence that they're ignoring. They're also ignoring another major point. And watch this clip next and watch how they ignore who gets arrested. This is awesome. Radio Free Canada, and it's so cool to be at work today.
Hundreds of protesters crowded the street outside a building in Vancouver where hearings on the Enbridge pipeline project are being held, and some of them managed to get inside. They call the project a climate crime. The pipeline will carry oil from Alberta across northern BC to Kitimat for shipment overseas. The CBC's Kirk Williams was at the hearing. He joins us now. So, Kirk, what happened at the hearing?
Well, those hundreds of protesters were at an event last night, and today was expected to be rather quiet, Gloria. We just settled down to watch the hearing, and then in walked 5 people, young people, with police tape and started blowing whistles. They were wearing T-shirts saying, "Stop the pipeline." And at that point, the hearing came to a complete halt. Organizers asked them, are they prepared to leave? They did not answer. They kept blowing their whistles. Then the police arrived, asked them if they were prepared to leave. They refused to answer. So eventually police handcuffed them and quietly led them out of the room one by one, where they were put into a waiting wagon downstairs. So this was set up in a venue that was supposed to prevent these kinds of protests. There is another hotel about a kilometer away, and also in downtown Vancouver, where where the public is allowed to go watch these hearings. These hearings were just for the people speaking and their guest, no one else. So this was a breach of the security plan that the National Energy Board and the organizers had set up in anticipation of these kind of protests, because both in Victoria and in Vancouver, this procedure was in place because of the threat of protests against this pipeline project.
So how are they going to prevent this happening in the future?
Well, the organizers say that they're going to still keep up this system. They're going to have 2 separate venues. After the protest today, there were 2 officers posted outside the room in which the hearings actually take place, and they say that they will have a distinct police presence right through the hearings, the remainder of this week, and then the hearings are back in Vancouver at a later date, and they'll also have a police presence there at that time too. Gloria?
Radio Free Canada. There's Bridget DePape got arrested.
Yeah, and the charge, of course, is assault by trespass.
Yes. So make sure that you get misinformed. Pay attention to major news. but get informed about what's going on and what they're missing. I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
We'll be right back with more news in Radio Free Canada.